For centuries, the West has been and remains the most destructive outside actor and the strongest force against swift, independent development and deepening of democracy in the African continent. Even after the countries in the continent had gained their independence, the West Coast has refused to let go of its influence, preferring to exercise control in every area possible, including military, economic, and governance in order to further their interest. This act by the West has made the continent lose valuable time in its pursuit of development, leaving it the poorest and most underdeveloped continent in the world. Interestingly, on the surface, Western influence and hold comes in the form of an intention to help the continent catch up with the rest of the world in terms of growth and development. So, they engage in numerous humanitarian activities across the continent, sending financial aid worth billions of dollars to countries in Africa. However, if you look deeper, this help is only a means of exercising influence and control over the affairs of the continent, and it's mere peanut compared to what the West extracts from the continent annually. The African continent is poor and underdeveloped and seemingly has nothing to offer to the West, yet Western countries and the international community have refused to let go. They say Africa is ravaged by disease, poverty, war, and insecurity, yet they refuse to let go. They say Africa is not capable of self-governance, and it's filled with unpatriotic leaders who do not care for the people but for their own belly, yet they refuse to let go. The West continues to have this fascination with Africa, always interested in what's happening in the countries on the continent, and scheming on how to manipulate the affairs of Africa to suit their interest. The question is why? Why is the West so interested in Africa? Is it a case of love for humanity whereby because the West has more wealth and power, they believe it's their God-given right to help their fellow humans on the other side of the world achieve this wealth and prosperity? Or is it something deeper? The truth is, contrary to what they would tell you, Africa has a lot to offer to the world. Yes, the continent is currently underdeveloped, the majority of its people are living in poverty, there are not enough jobs for the growing young population, and most of its leaders are selfish and unpatriotic. However, the continent is blessed with abundant resources, both minerals and humans, that are capable of making any country a superpower. This is what the West and Europe first discovered, leading to the Great Scramble for Africa and subsequently the colonization of the entire continent. The West understood that whatever country controls a bigger share of the continent has the capacity to become top in the world. Hence the reason for colonization and the subsequent exploitation and plundering of the continent's abundant resources, which were used to build Europe and the West into the great power you see today. In essence, Africa built Europe and the West. While the West was busy enjoying the results of its exploitation of Africa, Africa was struggling to get back on its feet after patriotic leaders fought for its independence. The colonization of the continent had a heavy and lasting impact on economic, social, and political affairs, leading to what Nkrumah called neo-colonialism. To make matters worse, the colonial masters left political and administrative systems in place which African leaders had to follow because they didn't know any better, but these systems were detrimental to the growth of their countries. For example, Francophone Africa continued to follow the economic system set in place by France, which gave France great control over their affairs. At first, it seemed like things were going well, with African countries experiencing growth and discovering mineral resources that they believed would help the development of the continent, which was already behind. However, a combination of factors including internal struggles caused by the systems established by the colonial masters led to a myriad of challenges. Some of the countries went into a civil war, such as Angola, which lasted for decades, while others experienced a sharp economic decline. The West saw this as another avenue and opportunity to exercise control over the continent, enabling it to further its interests. So, the West swooped in like a savior, offering military help to those ravaged by insecurity and civil war, and financial loans that came with conditions for those experiencing economic decline. However, this further worsened the situation, even after the conflict ended, which, if you observe, didn't end because of the Western military, but because of a strong African leader, such as in the case of Angola and Rwanda. The Western military refused to leave these countries. This is because it was a perfect opportunity to show control and power. And from one country, the foreign military bases begin to spread even in countries that have no security problems. Countries that accepted financial aid and loans from the West also experienced significant issues. As we stated earlier, these loans and aid came with conditions including the reduction of government spending on public infrastructures, privatization of government companies, attracting foreign investment by creating favorable conditions for foreign companies to establish in the country, and let's not forget conditions which were political in nature. These conditions, which came with the so-called Structural Adjustment Program, launched by the World Bank and IMF, set the path for the failure of African economies. In truth, the SAP was not to help African countries. Instead, it was a tool used by the West to ensure that Africa was completely dependent on them for everything, despite their abundant resources. It also ensured that they had access to the resources, and this was made possible by the hundreds of Western companies that came to set up operations in Africa. Just because African countries were trying to attract foreign investment, they signed deals with these foreign multinational corporations that favored the companies more than it favored them. These companies were given tax-free holidays, and they received the lion's share of whatever profit gotten from the exploration of African resources. Aside from the Structural Adjustment Program, it can rightly be said that foreign companies are another major cause of the economic failure and dependency experienced by most African economies. These companies were not only protected by the unfavorable deals signed between them and the host countries, but also by the military forces of the West, which were already established in the countries. But what did African countries gain from it? Nothing but mere peanuts from royalties on the exploration of the soil and pollution of the land and the sea, leading to dangerous environmental hazards that these companies didn't even bother to fix. Throughout all these, African leaders didn't do anything about it. They were weak and greedy and heeded the dictates of the West. There were some who stood up, such as Thomas Sankara and Muammar Gaddafi, but they were killed and assassinated by the West with the help of weak and greedy African leaders. This is why the West is very concerned with the political affairs of African countries. When a leader is elected, they come to offer rewards, including military and financial support, if the leader agrees to further their interests even at the detriment of their citizens. If the leader agrees, all is well and he can rule for as long as he likes, as long as he carries out a sham of an election. However, if he doesn't agree, he is assassinated and called a dictator and abuser of human rights. Hence, the status quo has remained the same, with the West controlling everything from politics to the military and economy, while African leaders turn the other way in exchange for financial and military support. Meanwhile, it's the African people that are at the receiving end of all this. They struggle to survive under harsh economic conditions and bad infrastructure, while the leaders fill their pockets with public funds. Those who are fed up with the system choose to migrate to the West in search of better opportunities. Some succeed while others die on the journey. Such a sad tale. However, things have begun to change. The biggest problem Africa has is not the West, but its lack of strong leaders who are ready to defend the continent against the West. Since 2020, however, new leaders have begun to rise. It started with the coup in Mali, which then spread to Burkina Faso in 2022 and Niger in 2023. There were other coups, of course, which happened in Guinea, Gabon, and Chad. However, the coups in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso are different not just because they were bloodless, but because they brought out remarkable leaders who, since they arrived, have caused big changes in Africa geopolitics. Like former permanent representative to the African Union Mission in Washington, D.C., Dr. Arikana Chihombori Kwao from Zimbabwe said, "These coups are a revolution. These coups brought out the caliber of leaders that Africa needs." Even the West has acknowledged that the military leaders of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso are different from the other African leaders. In one of the Congress meetings held in the United States, one of the military generals of the United States called the military leaders of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso sophisticated, meaning that they are highly intelligent and different from the other African leaders the U.S. was used to dealing with. Just look at what they have accomplished since they came into power. Like a domino, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso kicked out French forces and ended the colonial pact, which gave France significant control over Francophone Africa, thereby causing France to lose the strong grip it has had on these nations. But that's not all. They have also taken control of their resources, nationalizing them to the benefit of the people. Ibrahim Traoré, for instance, has suspended the export of gold, the country's major export product, to the West so that the country can take charge of the gold mining industry. He has also established a gold refinery, the first of its kind in the country, so that gold would no longer be sold only in its pure form at a cheap rate, but in its refined state. Through this, Burkina Faso will get tremendous value for its resources. Mali has also taken a similar step, signing a deal with Russia to build a gold refinery for the country. None of the democratic leaders in these countries had ever thought of building a refinery, yet they are hailed by the West as their allies. And why not, when these leaders turn the other way, to ensure continued exploitation of their country's resources? What a shame. These leaders have proven that they are ready to defend the complete independence of their countries, no matter the cost. To the shock of the West, they have chosen to partner with countries that are rivals to the West, including Russia and China, two countries that prefer to work with Africa based on mutual benefits and not control. Recently, Niger made history by becoming the first African country to send the U.S. packing. This is something that has never happened. The U.S. military presence in the country has not done anything to alleviate the insecurity that has plagued the country for years. In fact, Niger has no visible benefit from the presence of U.S. forces in the country. It makes us wonder whether the previous government was blind when it signed such an agreement with the United States. However, the military government of Niger stood its ground, refused to give in to the condition of the United States, and instead sent them packing. Chad has also taken a similar step, threatening to end the status of force agreement, which allowed the United States military forces to remain in the country. No doubt Chad, a country that has been regarded as a strong ally of France and the U.S., had the guts to do this because Niger took that step. Even if the U.S. doesn't end up leaving Chad, there is no doubt that Chad will renegotiate with the United States for better benefits. Without a doubt, things have changed. The African continent has awakened and is taking charge of its destiny, while the military leaders in the Sahel are causing tremendous changes in African geopolitics. Other African countries are also awakening. Take a look at South Africa, which has decided to take an ally of the United States, Israel, to court accusing it of committing genocide. Standing against an ally of the United States means standing against the United States, but South Africa has refused to cower and is charging ahead, despite the risk and the threats from the United States. Things are indeed changing, and a revolution has started that cannot be stopped. It's now left for other African countries to follow in the footsteps of this revolution. The West and Europe are not friends of Africa. They would rather see the continent remain poor as long as it furthers their interest. So, it's time for all Africans to unite and push this revolution forward because Africa belongs to Africans. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video.